Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome everyone to this deep dive. Today, we are plunging right into the world of XRP, the digital asset tied to Ripple.
Exactly. And we're working from a specific set of sources. You've gathered articles, analyses, market reports, all pretty current, from mid-June 2025. Our goal here is really to pull out the key insights, figure out where XRP stands right now, and maybe what the next few months could look like based on what these materials are saying.
Absolutely. It really feels like XRP is at, well, a bit of a crossroads, doesn't it? After all these years dealing with regulatory stuff and, the usual market swings. So our mission today is simple. Cut through the noise, use only these sources, and give you a clear picture of what's actually shaping its value and potential right now.
Right. And these sources, they start us off with a pretty clear snapshot of the present moment. We're talking June 12th, 2025.
Yeah, they mentioned the price is sort of bouncing between $2.22 and 2.29 US dollars.
That's the range. And the way the market's acting around that price, it's interesting. The sources are describing like a recent recovery, maybe some stabilization, the day-to-day price swings, the intraday volatility. It's been fairly contained lately.
Okay, and what does that usually, that kind of contain volatility?
Well, according to the analyses we have, it often points towards consolidation. The market's not making huge moves either way. Sometimes this tight range trading can also suggest accumulation might be happening, like buyers could be quietly building up their positions around these levels, maybe anticipating a bigger move later.
Gotcha. So that's the current pulse. But the sources, they all seem to agree on the one massive factor hanging over XRP's immediate future.
Oh, without a doubt. It's the ongoing SEC lawsuit against Ripple. These materials consistently highlight that as the most critical piece of the puzzle right now.
And there's a date coming up fast that the sources are really focusing on, isn't there?
Yes, June 16th, 2025. That's the deadline for the SEC to file its status report in the appeals court. Analysts are watching this one closely because, well, it could bring some much-needed clarity, or at least signal what the next steps in this legal fight might be.
And what are the sources hinting might happen around then? Any potential outcomes being discussed?
Yeah, there's talk based on market rumors and some legal commentary cited in the reports about a possible settlement, maybe getting closer. This hypothetical settlement, as it's laid out, could mean a smaller fine for Ripple than what the SEC initially wanted. And really importantly, it might finally lift those restrictions on Ripple selling XRP.
Ah, okay. So the idea is if this whole lawsuit wraps up in a way that's decent for Ripple, maybe a settlement that removes that selling pressure.
That's exactly it. The sources are pretty blunt. Getting rid of this years-long regulatory fog is widely expected to be, a massive bullish catalyst. It's seen as the main thing holding back that significant upside potential everyone talks about.
Makes sense. So the lawsuit is obviously front and center. But the sources also look at Ripple's actual business too, right? What they're doing outside the courtroom.
They do, yeah. They shift gears to look at Ripple's role in, global payments. The materials mention that over 300 financial institutions are already using Ripple solutions for cross-border stuff.
And there's that bigger sort of underlying shift happening in how money moves globally that the sources connect to XRP.
Right, you're talking about the big migration to the ISO 2022 standard. It's basically a new, more detailed language for financial messages, way more efficient than the old systems. Major players like Fedwire in the US, Swift globally, they're all moving towards this.
Okay, but how does that connect to XRP specifically? Why is that standard a big deal for this particular asset?
Well, because XRP itself was designed for speed and efficiency in cross-border payments, settling in seconds for tiny fees, the ISO 2022 standard helps banks talk to each other better, faster, with more data. So an asset like XRP, which can actually move the value that quickly and cheaply, fits really nicely into the kind of modernized system that ISO 2022 enables. It sort of positions XRP as a potential tool for institutions operating in that new framework.
Okay, right. So we've got the potential end of the lawsuit, the ongoing adoption by institutions, and this alignment with global payment trends. So naturally, the sources start talking price predictions for the rest of 2025.
Yeah, and as you'd expect with crypto, the predictions are kind of varied. But there's definitely a generally optimistic tone, though it's heavily, heavily dependent on those catalysts we just talked about actually happening.
So let's break down the optimistic scenario that some sources are sketching out. What does that involve?
Okay, so this rosier outlook, it's very conditional. It absolutely needs that favorable SEC outcome, but it also relies on the potential approval of an XRP ETF. The sources are mentioning pretty strong rumors about an ETF becoming a real possibility later in 2025.
An ETF, right. For anyone listening who doesn't follow this stuff super closely, what exactly is an ETF in this context? Why is it such a potential game changer?
Sure. So an ETF, an exchange-traded fund, it's basically a fund that holds XRP, but its shares trade on regular stock exchanges, like the New York Stock Exchange. It means big institutions, pension funds, even regular investors using brokers, they can get exposure to XRP's price without actually having to buy and store the crypto themselves. It's a huge bridge to mainstream finance. The sources really emphasize that an XRP ETF could unlock a ton of institutional money that's currently sitting on the sidelines, either because they can't or won't invest directly in crypto assets.
Got it. Makes access way easier. Okay, so if you get the good SEC news, Andean ETF gets the green light. What kind of price targets are these optimistic sources throwing out?
They're pretty substantial, especially compared to now. The projections cited range from around $20 up to maybe $27 USD. Some analysts even push that number to $50 USD, but that's usually tied to speculation about really big players like, say, BlackRock potentially launching an ETF.
Wow, okay. $20, $50.
Yeah.
That's a massive jump from the current $2-ish.
Yeah, it's a huge jump. But, and this is a really important caveat, and the sources, even in that optimistic scenario, they warn that a significant correction, a pullback, is very likely after such a rapid climb. Those kinds of crazy parabolic moves almost never sustain themselves without dropping back quite a bit.
Right, reality check there. Okay, putting aside the really high-flying guesses, what about the more specific, maybe grounded analyst predictions mentioned?
We see a bit of a range there, too. Like digital coin price suggests maybe a peak near $5.22 sometime in October, settling back towards $3.99 by year-end. Then you have CryptoMez. They seem to think a strong rise starts mid-year, possibly hitting a max of $4.56 in December.
And any based purely on technical chart patterns?
Yeah, Light Finance uses technical analysis, and they see more of a gradual climb, maybe topping out around $2.80 in December. But then you also see some really aggressive technical takes, like on TradingView, where some analysts see potential for, well, believe it or not, $73 USD. But that's only if XRP smashes through major resistance zones around $3 to $3.30.
Resistance being those price levels we're selling usually kicks in hard, right?
Exactly. Breaking those levels strongly would be a major technical signal, but $73 is definitely an outlier target based on that kind of breakout.
Okay, so the numbers are really all over the map, from a few bucks up to, well, potentially much higher. And it sounds like that huge range depends entirely on which catalysts actually fire the SEC case, the ETF.
Precisely. The predictions aren't just random numbers. They're pretty explicitly tied to these major events playing out well. The really bullish targets absolutely depend on those big unlocks, especially the ETF.
The sources also gave a quick look at the technicals right now as of mid-June.
Yeah, just a snapshot. They note the current price is bumping up against resistance near $2.28. And on the downside, there seems to be solid support around $2.08 or $2.10, places where buyers have tended to step in before.
And what about momentum? Are things looking bullish or bearish on the charts right now?
It's kind of mixed, according to the analysis. Your short-term momentum indicators, like the RSI and MACD, they look pretty bullish, suggesting there might be some upward push in the near term. But the longer-term moving averages, which smooth out the price over weeks or months, they still suggest some caution is warranted. The bigger picture trend isn't strongly bullish yet, based on those.
Okay, so pulling all these different threads together,
Yeah.
the lawsuit's massive shadow, the real-world adoption, the ETF buzz, those wild predictions, the current technicals, what's the main synthesis coming out of these sources?
I think the core finding really is that XRP is sitting at a genuine inflection point, and the SEC case resolution is flagged again and again as the single most dominant near-term factor that could tip the scales.
And if it resolves favorably, it's not just about ending the lawsuit itself. It's seen as clearing the way for potentially much bigger players, institutional money, especially if that ETF possibility becomes reality, which seems to be a growing narrative in these sources.
Exactly, and that potential is backed up fundamentally by XRP's design for global payments and how it seems to fit with where things are heading, like with ISO 2022. So while the price targets vary wildly, the overall sense of optimism you see in many reports is really leaning heavily on these specific catalysts falling into place.
But crucially, it's not all sunshine and rockets, is it? The sources are pretty clear about the significant hurdles and risks, too.
Oh, absolutely. They definitely temper the excitement with a list of real challenges. First up, just the basic market volatility of crypto. Prices can go haywire based on anything, sentiment shifts, unrelated news, broader economic jitters, geopolitical stuff.
And Ripple isn't alone in this space.
Not at all. There's serious competition. both from other blockchains trying to do similar things with payments, and also from the traditional finance world, which is innovating too, trying to speed up their own systems.
Right. And getting over 300 institutions using the tech is great, but getting the entire global financial system on board.
That's the large-scale adoption hurdle. It's a long, slow grind. Getting banks and financial institutions everywhere to change how they operate takes time, faces inertia. It's definitely a marathon.
And even if the SEC chapter closes in the U.S.,
Regulation is always changing. You've got evolving regulations globally, new rules popping up in Europe, Asia, elsewhere. They could still impact Ripple's business or how XRP gets used in different parts of the world.
and finally, bringing it back to the biggest single factor.
Yeah, the sources really hammer home the dependence on the SEC case. While it feels like we're nearing the end, if the outcome isn't as good as hoped, or if there's just another unexpected lengthy delay, that would almost certainly put serious downward pressure on the price. It's still the #1 risk everyone points to.
So, summing up the picture, these sources paint for XRP for the rest of 2025. It seems like one of really significant potential, but it's potential that's almost entirely conditional on the SEC outcome and maybe that ETF approval. And all of that is balanced against some very real market risks, competition, and regulatory uncertainties.
That's a good summary. It's this mix of potentially very high upside, driven by these very specific potential events, alongside some pretty substantial challenges that could easily throw a wrench in the works.
It definitely leaves you with something to think about. Considering those potential highs, the Sources project, if everything lines up just right,
Yeah.
how do you personally weigh that opportunity against those very real challenges they mentioned? Especially that heavy reliance on the legal outcome and just the wild, unpredictable nature of crypto markets. Food for thought based on what we've unpacked here today.